Well, welcome to Binge Mode. This is a special podcast where we dive deep into past messages from Grace Community Church. We'll talk to guests, we'll explore spiritual living, and talk about what it looks like to live out our faith in practical ways. So we aren't going to be trying to preach these great messages again, but instead, we're going to go deep into the truths that are found there. So welcome to Binge Mode. My name's Jake. I get to be the lead pastor of the Port Jervis location, and I get to be your host here today. And we're so glad that you're joining us.
Hey everybody, I'm Tyler. I get to be the marketing director at Grace, and every Thursday we've been playing messages from the past. We're calling it Throwback Thursday. So it's a way for us just to come back to these really great, incredible teachings and truths that Pastor Jared has preached from the past, and some of our other pastors as well. You can catch all of that over on our Grace OC Facebook page. That's where we're putting it every single week. But if you're worried that you haven't listened to or watched the message for this week, that's okay. You don't have to have listened to it to follow along with us. We're going to explain all the points and stuff that we're getting into. So, but we're so glad you're listening this week.
Yes. Now, this message was originally preached by Pastor Jared, this whole series back in the summer of 2017. And the entire series is about the life of one of the most interesting, flawed, but dedicated figures in the Bible, King David. So he went from a humble sheep herder to a powerful warrior to king of all of Israel. So he also received probably the most important promise in the scriptures, that the Messiah would come from his lineage. The theme throughout this entire series is that God forever holds the divided heart of those who wholly pursue his.
So this week on the show, we've got Pastor Chris Arroyo with us.
Yep.
He leads our Collective Youth ministry, guiding our students, working on discipling them, getting them serving. Chris, we are so glad to have you on the show this week.
Dude, I'm happy to be here, man. I'm super excited. I'm a huge fan of both you and Jake.
That is not what I thought you were going to say. But I'll take it.
That's good.
Well, thanks, man. That feels good. Feels good, man. So I'm, I was thinking about Collective Youth as we're getting ready for the show today, and I'm imagining Collective Youth looks very different right now, and I'm sure there's lots going on. And you're somebody who's kind of a visionary, who's always got something cooking. So what are you focusing on right now? What are you excited to be working on?
Oh man, there are so many things that are happening with Collective Youth. I don't know if you guys knew this, but I think youth ministry has changed a lot over the past couple of months. So we really had to kind of shift what we were doing and try new stuff. So right now, every Sunday at 6 p.m., we do have our youth service on our YouTube channel. That is right.
Nice.
We have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Collective Youth, to visit that. So we have service Sundays at 6 p.m. We also have virtual Bible studies that are happening throughout the week.
Oh,
so
cool.
Yeah. Every campus has some different people doing hosting a Bible study via Zoom or via Teams. So lots of stuff happening, keeping the students engaged and bringing them together, even though we can't be together.
Yeah.
It's really important that we have that sense of community.
I imagine that students probably kind of rolled with it, though, being they're more, I don't know, I guess they call it digital natives. Have you seen that your students have just kind of been like, hey, yeah, this is awesome, or has it been a struggle for them?
I think that even though they are very digital, it is still a struggle.
Yeah.
While they know what to do with computers. It's not like calling your grandma and being like, okay, right click and okay, close that tab. It's not like that. Yeah. But teenagers are incredibly social creatures.
Yeah.
And they need that. And so yeah, it's not quite the same. Digital will never replace face-to-face, meetings, like we're there in the flesh type thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that part is still a struggle for them, for sure.
Well, no doubt. It sounds like you're really meeting a need, though. You're really helping them out with that. And we've already insulted grandmas and called teenagers creatures. So this is a great start to a podcast. I'm already enjoying this.
Okay, yeah.
One more thought, since we're already bringing the irreverence, one more thought, a little irreverent that I was interested in hearing is I know you are a lover of cars.
Yeah,
Not that we support this kind of life choice, but you even got a tattoo on your forearm that I was hoping that you could unpack a little bit. But cars, tell me about your love of that. Which is better, Matchbox or Hot Wheels? Who wins the day?
Wow. Well, I do not discriminate between the Hot Wheels and the Matchbox cars. So they're both equally awesome with that. But yeah, I am a car guy, but I'm kind of a quiet car guy because car guys have like this weird, what do you call it? Like this weird
persona?
Persona or reputation type thing. So like you'll have like the really boring car guys that are into like numbers, and if the engine matches the car, did it come with like, ooh, do the numbers match? Ooh, is the paint code, is that all? So you have those guys, and then you have like the yeah, brother, nitrous, that kind of side of it.
Wow.
Which is what all the TV shows are made of, those guys. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not that guy. I love cars. I love really weird cars. So old Volkswagens, that's what I'm working on. I'm currently restoring a 1974 Volkswagen Thing.
It's called a Thing?
It is actually literally just called a Thing. You can look it up, Google it. It's pretty awesome. It was my high school car, so it's in pieces. And so, yeah, doing some welding, rebuilding the engine, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, then the tattoos, one of them is a Volkswagen engine because I like to build them for fun because I'm weird like that. It's therapeutic. It really is.
I get it.
Because with ministry, you don't always see the results like immediately, right? Because whatever. But like with that, if an engine works or not, doesn't work.
Yeah, definitely.
So that kind of works. Then the other one is a shift pattern because we need to save all of the manual cars because it's a dying thing. They stick shift cars. And then the steering wheel is actually like a GT steering wheel because I used to race oval track down in Florida.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Did not know that.
Dude, this has
awesome.
actually been really good getting to know this side of you, and that there's a whole subspecies of humans that enjoy this kind of thing.
We were doing so good at not offending anyone until you said that.
I don't think so. I think that we have destroyed our listener base already.
Well, here's the thing though. Like you had me on, so you've already destroyed.
Good point. Yeah.
We're about to break the internet with you being here. That's what I'm imagining.
Yeah, basically.
Cool. Well, we're getting into week 2 of Man on Fire, which is about the life of David. And the title of this message was Trials by Fire. And Jake and I were kind of laughing about this when we were talking about the message, but like literally the intro is half of the message this week, which is great because it just shows how much good stuff there is in this Life of David series.
It's so good.
So much good. So the first thing that really kind of hit me across the face was this quote. This is where I'll start, though. Pastor Jared said, David could never become all that he could become without the trial of fire in his life. And he makes the point that David was a man after God's own heart. He was a man who obviously was pursuing God, deep in the scriptures, maybe even writing Psalms. We know that was part of what he did when he was sort of out there in the flocks and being a shepherd. And yet he was still not all that God wanted him to be. It took the trials in his life. And oh my gosh, does the man have some trials in his life. It took those trials to make him become what God wanted him to be. And that hit me because I know so often I definitely have this default in my life that is, hey, I'm doing everything right, like no major sin. I'm getting in God's word. I'm going to church, I'm listening to Pastor Jared. I'm good. But no, like there's even more that God wants to do, and it can only happen from trials.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When Jared was saying that, like, yeah, you can you can be the best Bible scholar, you can be the closest with God and everything, and yeah, you still have to go through trial. And when he said that, I'm just like, oh man, I don't want to go through all of that, but truly no. But trial really makes us who we are, and good Lord, we're going through lots of trials nowadays.
Yeah, that was a little bit of an awakening part. It was good in one sense because it means that those trials that we have gone through aren't wasted, right? Like we talk about not wasting our suffering, and just hearing that there's a purpose in that pain is good to know. It doesn't feel great looking ahead to the future, like you said, Chris, like, oh, I still have to go through more. Oh, there's more before I get to, Tyler, could you tell me again, what was that quote about David could not have become what he was?
Yeah, David could never become all that he could become without the trial of fire in his life.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think
so
even when I think about that, like there's some shades there that I think is really interesting. Like we have maybe an expectation. Honestly, I just had this thought. We have this expectation of what we think we should be or what we think we could be. And then God has a completely different and probably way, way higher expectation of what we can be and what he wants us to be to accomplish his mission. And I wonder if often we almost sell ourselves short of thinking of what we could be. And God's like, no, I want you to be so much more than that, but it's going to take trial.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of it too, is I don't want to go through trials. So I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm good. I'm kind of good where I'm at. Like,
yeah, man. Well, what I find most interesting about David is this, so he was the least of his household. He was, he had bigger, stronger brothers. Yep. He was out with the sheepies, okay, doing his thing, playing a harp, okay. I didn't realize this. I had to go back, but David was anointed to be king before he killed Goliath.
Yes.
And yet, there were people in his life who doubted him and who were just talking so much dirt about the guy, like having no faith in him. It's like, yo, actually, David's already anointed, and yet he still had people just throwing shade and being negative all the time.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a good way to think about it, is that that there was shade being thrown. And I actually like the way Tyler talked about it, that there are different shades of suffering. There's different ways we experience it. And even just to unpack that a little bit, like, and I'm sure you guys have thoughts on this too, but different kinds of suffering, different shades of suffering that we
real quick before you get into that, just to kind of give a little bit of background. So Jake and I, as we were sort of marinating on this and talking about how do we want to like discuss suffering, because it's such a big deal, in everyone's life. And so we came up with like a way of sort of formalizing, that's a terrible word, a way of thinking about it. And we decided to call it the 5 shades of suffering. So we'd love to get into that for you listeners and talk through each of those 5 things. And hopefully it'd be maybe of some help. So Jake, go ahead and take it away. But I wanted to give a little bit of background so people aren't wondering like, where is this coming from? It's really just a thing that Jake and I kind of came up with as we thought about how do we make this message helpful for people.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it kind of categorizes some suffering, and I hope that this does not come off as sort of tone deaf, because the hope for it is to be able to bring some objectivity to what we are enduring and actually allow us to think above it, think beyond the thing that we're enduring. So this is not to make light of any suffering or make light of any of the trials that we go through. It's still all very real. This just kind of helps us think through it, where it's coming from, the kind of objective purpose of it. So one of the first ones was just trials in general. So with the trials by fire, the title of this message that we're going through, it's more of a general term, but there's different kinds of suffering. So there's trials, which in this context we're talking through in this list is more like it's general trouble. And that's just because we live in a broken, sin-filled world, and trials come.
Yep.
Then there's also ones that are, we have an enemy, all of us, we have a common enemy, and he tempts us, and he's trying to lead us away from the Lord and lead us away from the path that he's laid out for us, and it's our own flesh working against the Holy Spirit in us. So those are the first two, is trials and then temptations.
Yeah, and trials is a tricky one because sometimes I think we want to attribute those to something and try to find a purpose in the midst of it. And like, especially where we're at right now in the pandemic, it's easy to say, blame maybe somebody for this, when ultimately it is just the consequences of being in a broken, sinful world, and there's really no like way around it. And I think health crises are another one of those. You're facing some kind of cancer, or maybe you have COVID right now. That's not necessarily,
or just the threat of it.
Yeah,
the fact that it's potential.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's not necessarily anybody's fault. It's just a consequence of being in a broken, sinful world. And I think that God wants to use those things in our life to remind us that this is not the world that he planned. He planned a perfect world. So anyway, number one, 5 shades of suffering. Number 1 is trials, just general trouble. Number 2 is temptations that Jay covered. Number 3 is persecution, which is just one of the tricky ones, because it's suffering that we face just because we're Christian. Just because we live in a culture that is against what God is for. And so oftentimes, I know I've experienced this, Chris. I'd love to hear if you've experienced this before, but you're maybe as an employee, you would say, I'm not going to do things a certain way because I don't believe that they line up with Scripture. And maybe you face persecution from a boss who wants you to fudge numbers or wants you to say something to make to make him look better. And you're like, no, I'm not going to do that. Or maybe you face persecution because you make other people around you, unbelievers, feel guilty. Chris, do you have any, I don't know if you've experienced that or you have any thoughts on that?
Oh gosh. Yeah. So, I believe it or not, I used to work at a Ford dealership. This was before ministry and everything like that. And so I was kind of known as like the Jesus guy type thing.
Yes.
So it was kind of funny when the lunch breaks would happen and these guys would be watching God knows what on their laptops or sometimes in the DVD players of customers' cars. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They would turn stuff on or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, you know what? I'm not going to be part of that, type thing.
Yeah.
And it just you kind of get this like Bible thumper, goody two shoes kind of reputation.
Yep.
And that's something that I know a lot of our teenagers struggle with, how to be a Christian in a public school nowadays. It is insanely hard to do that. So I definitely feel for our kids for sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's this thought that was coming to my mind as you were talking about it in those terms, like what even teenagers especially have to endure.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back to my own early teenage years before I really knew the Lord. And I'm thinking about, there's this one girl who was on kind of the periphery of our friend group, like would kind of come and hang sometimes and wanted to be closer to us. She was a believer. And just because I was a jerk, I was not kind to this person. Okay. She was always sweet. She was always loving. Was always patient with me. And for some reason, I was just a jerk and I really gave her a hard time and would really press into her about anything having to do with her faith. For some reason, I have no idea why, what caused me to do this. And inevitably, what the Lord had sewn up already was when I did give my life to the Lord, she ended up being at the church where I was led to the Lord.
No kidding.
I remember having this, like very early on, having this moment with her where I was asking her for forgiveness for this, because I'm basically like asking to be a part of her tribe now.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to push her out of the one that she was trying to get close with us. And is this making sense?
Yeah, definitely.
And very quickly, I got a very visceral understanding of the forgiveness of God because of this girl and who endured a type of persecution from me. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and just thinking about about teenagers, and Chris, I'm sure you have to talk with them all the time about this kind of thing, but you have no idea the way that you respond, what it will end up doing for folks in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that person now, she actually just recently, she also works for a church out in Colorado, and just recently her church put out a new worship album, and she sent me a bunch of copies, and it was just super cool that God had that all sewn up, and that had to do all with her persecution and the way that she was responding to it.
From
there's
you,
something
which is crazy.
different about it.
That's
yes,
so
thank you.
so
I
crazy.
appreciate the
Yeah,
reminder.
wasn't trying to rub it in.
No, it's good. Salt the wound. I need it. I deserve it.
Actually, speaking of like persecution and stuff, I remember when I was in college. So I didn't go to a Bible college. I went to University of Central Florida, so a secular school, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was in sociology or something. I can't remember what class it was, but I had a professor who was at one point a minister, left the faith, became atheist, and all that kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And so one day he was talking about Christianity and going like, yeah, Christianity is about as applicable as that old beat up Volkswagen out there in the parking lot, right? Like it used to work, but it has no place in today's society. And I just remember thinking, first of all, that's my car. And also, I'm
it
a
all comes back
believer.
around.
And I'm just like, oh man, like, thanks a lot.
That's a great point, though. Like, definitely, there's a lot of persecution going on intellectually in colleges nowadays for
Oh my gosh, yeah.
students who truly believe that the Bible is God's word, and how radical that is in our culture today, and how even you hear, how could you possibly think that? Science has disproven that, or we have all of these facts that have shown that that's not true. Which we obviously don't believe that. So I feel I can totally relate to that. So number 3 was suffering, and I love 1 Peter 4:16 because it says, "Yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name." And I love that because you're suffering solely because you're a Christian, but then Peter's exhortation is like, take pride in that name. Christian means Christ follower, one who, walks in the footsteps of Jesus. So I think there's, we can take pride in that. So that's number 3. Number 4 is chastening. And if any of these are like hard to understand, this is probably the hardest one.
Yeah.
But it's so good. Get after it, bro.
So chastening, this comes from Hebrews 12:7, where the author of Hebrews is talking about how God, as our Father, often disciplines us, just in the same way that good fathers discipline a child. Maybe they spank them, maybe they punish them, maybe they put them in timeout. But that is a part of the raising up of a good child, of a child who's going to listen and obey authority. That's a natural part of it. And the author of Hebrews says, hey, look, there are some times when God, as your Father, has to do that to you. And it is really hard. I definitely know in my life, the chastening of God, when it is God chastening, that is probably the hardest trials that you have in life, because it's you are off the path, and yet God, as a loving Father, refuses to let you continue down the road of destruction, and so He puts hard things in your life to drag you kicking and screaming back towards Him. But you know what I love about this passage in Hebrews 12 is that the author of Hebrews says, yes, it's hard, but don't be bitter about it, because it proves that God truly is your Father. And I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show. I feel like I have, but I was engaged before I met my wife. I think I did talk about this when we had her on the show. And it was definitely a chastening moment of God bringing circumstances into my life. Actually, one of my best friends had to go through like a really, really hard trial, sort of I kind of went alongside of him through that trial. And this is going to sound strange, but him going through that trial was a trial for me, and it was a chastening for me, a wake-up call, and God bringing me back. And again, it's never easy, but it is also proof that, you are a child of God.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can relate to that chastening, or if you even have any chastening stories in your own life. That's a tough one.
No, that's such a good piece, man. And it can I feel like it could be a very polarizing idea that God would kind of end up hurting those that He loves, disciplining those that He loves, specifically those that He is getting after. So, before I unpack anything, Chris, did you have a thought?
Oh, no, I was just saying that, I think I just did this with my little girl, Cassidy, last night. So she wouldn't eat all of her dinner. And if she doesn't have dinner, she doesn't get ice cream type thing. So she's sitting there going like, I want ice cream. And it's not helping that I'm eating ice cream in front of her.
What kind of father are you?
I know. Well, here's the thing. I ate my dinner, so I can have it.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So, oh gosh, please. Everyone's going to think I'm a terrible person. Hi, I'm your youth pastor. Anyways. But yeah, like I do that not because I'm trying to be mean to my sweet little girl, Cassidy, who can do no wrong. You know, it's I'm trying to develop her. I'm trying to walk her through something so she can learn. So yeah.
So yeah, number 4 is chastening. Let's just go back through all the 5 shades real quickly. So the 5 shades of suffering. Number 1 is trials. Number 2 is temptations. Number 3 is persecution. Number 4 is chastening. And Chris, I think you had our 5th one.
All right, the last shade number 5, consequences of sin. So these are basically trials that are not caused by general trouble or temptation or even suffering or anything like that. It's not because of other people. It's really a trial that you go through because of your faults and your mistakes, if you will. So yeah, and I truly believe that our society is so quick to put the blame on other people that we never look at ourselves and figure out like, okay, the stuff that's happening to me, is this some cosmic thing from God, or is it because I did something and now I have to walk through the consequences of that?
Yeah.
I mean, so many Christians who like blame God for things or blame the devil for things. And yeah, some of that is true, right? But there are some times when I'm like, yeah, that's your fault. Like the devil, he wasn't anywhere near this. He was working at the DMV. He had nothing to do with this. Why blame God?
Yep. You know what? And so probably what the hardest thing of this form of suffering is that even though forgiveness is always free and God will always forgive when we ask, he does not always. Sometimes he does, but he does not always remove consequences. And in fact, actually, I think of David as a good example of this. When David did the whole thing with Bathsheba, the consequences of his sin was that the child that they had to die. And even though David fell on his face and he prayed and asked God forgiveness, and we know that God forgave him, specifically spells that out, God said, I'm not going to remove this consequence. Your child is going to die. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things to swallow. Like, God's forgiveness is free, but he doesn't take away consequences in reality sometimes of our sin. Sometimes he does. I'm not saying he doesn't, but often he doesn't. And even in David's life, I don't know if we've even gotten this far in his life, but even in David's life, he had to endure that trial of losing his child, and it was only because of his sin, nothing else.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow. You know, going through them, the different shades is helpful for me, again, to kind of get some objectivity, seeing that there is a purpose in my pain. Because for me, I'm a very simple man. Okay, so I end up trying to make it.
Great song, by the way.
Oh yeah. For whatever this is worth, shout out to my mom. That is the song that we danced to at my wedding. My mom and I.
That's awesome.
Simple Man. Yep.
That's
okay.
great.
By Leonard Skinner. Tells you a little bit about my family. Okay. It was awesome. It was beautiful. Anyway, I am a simple man. And I end up thinking I try to think about the causality of it and wondering, okay, was it self-inflicted or was it others inflicted? And what that does is it removes the idea that it is, it removes the eternal perspective. Or it removes there could be a cosmic purpose in my pain. So this is going through those, the 5 shades of suffering has been helpful for me. Just a tool to kind of be able to think through things.
And, it's not even simple. And that's part of the reason why we decided to call them shades, because they do often blend into each other. And you're not sure, is this thing that's a trial, is that also chastening? You know, is God using the pandemic in my life to teach me something important and drag me back to himself? Or is this temptation that I'm feeling, is that God pointing out an area, or is the suffering, the persecution I'm going through, is that part of consequences of, so all of them can blend into each other, and it's not always one, and you may not even always know. So there's a lot of shades to this whole discussion.
That's exactly what I'm saying, is when I make it a binary thing and it's either my self-inflicted or others inflicted, it removes the fact that God was working all this out for my good and his glory anyways. So that's such a great point. So thanks for going through that, guys. And there was one quote that Pastor Jared brought up by Tozer, of whom God will use greatly, he will wound deeply. And that just that helps me understand and kind of reason and be okay with my suffering. Man, I love that point that you just brought up. It's we might not, it'll bleed together, and we might not even know, especially in the mix of it, where it's coming from or what its purpose is. But our job in the mix of it is to be faithful in all of that. And the trial reveals something about us. That's the way Pastor Jared had brought it up, is the trial reveals something about ourselves, reveals our strength or our weaknesses, reveals our character. And Saul kind of, we get a picture of him when we see that David slays Goliath, and then these people make this really terrible song, and they it just doesn't really resonate with me. It seemed like it was a real big hit in the day, but it wasn't. Well,
I mean, it's also translated, so you don't know. It might have been more catchy in the original language.
That's true. Okay. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So there's this trial, so to speak, that Saul is going through, and Saul's anger is revealed in this trial. And trial reveals us to ourselves. So you see Saul's insecurity in that moment. And it is insecurity is so not a good look on a leader, on a strong, mature adult. And what makes us insecure is so telling.
Right.
And we see this was an interesting thought earlier on, just a chapter before everything goes down with David. I think in 1 Samuel 14, you see Saul celebrating other warriors, good, strong warriors. He keeps them close to himself. But something about David unsettles Saul. He feels threatened. And for me, Chris, I was really interested to get into this with you because truthfully, there are some really amazing people in my circle. And sometimes when I'm in a not great place, I feel threatened by their potential.
Oh, wow.
But the truth is that I see something in them, and I see some potential in them for them to do awesome, great things. And I hope that they go way beyond me. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Chris, as somebody who's working with young people and see potential looks real good on young people, especially. How do you identify potential? How do you personally build into other people's potential? But how do you identify that in folks?
Well, one thing I always tell my students is to always kind of walk in God in a way that he reveals your potential to you. And that can only come through closeness, with actually having a relationship with him. So doing that, but then also having a confidence that is not earthly. It doesn't come from you. It's not arrogance, but it's a confidence that comes from God, knowing that, you know what, I'm a believer and I know God is in me. So I don't have to do things in my own power. I can do stuff through his. So making sure that the students understand that, and making sure that they have that security, right? And not that insecurity in their own power. And how do I actually identify it? It really manifests itself in different talents. And I'm not just talking about music talents, okay? Because here's the deal. A kid can not be musical and still be talented. I just want to throw that out there. Okay. But really kind of see where their curiosity is, where their passions lie, and then kind of giving them an opportunity to kind of run with that. For example, we have some really amazing teenagers who are great at writing. So one of the pieces on ColectiveYouth.com is a student blog. So I'm just like, hey, wow, you're a good writer. Why don't you, try this out? And what that accidentally does, right, unbeknownst to them, is kind of light a fire with them in that passion. and allow them to like, oh man, like this is a great opportunity. I want to do this. And that develops that gifting, like that skill set.
Yeah.
And it might not look pretty at first. You have to give them grace and room for failure, because you always need that.
Wow.
But
I love the way that you said this so far, is that you see where their curiosities lie and where their passions are, and then you kind of give them room to run. You give them the permission to fail, so to speak.
Right.
That's really cool.
That's good stuff. I was thinking about our discussion back when we were talking back like it was a long time ago, but our discussion on trials, and I was thinking about actually, even this blends into what you were talking about, Chris, a guy that I discipled a couple of years back. And so as I'm like working through things with him, he kind of told me that back when he was in high school, some of the coaches on his basketball team emotionally, physically abused him. And I have a feeling there was even more to it than what he was like comfortable telling me about. Yeah. And I remember, and Pastor Jared, I think, hits this even in the message too, talking about how those kinds of things that come up in our life, and that could fall under trials, other people's sin falling and bleeding over into our life is part of that. It's not necessarily our fault. If you're the victim, it's not your fault necessarily. Could have nothing to do with you, but it can either define your life, or it can be used by God to bring you closer to Him. And the quote that Pastor Jared said that I love, he said, "Don't let this make me bitter, but better."
But better, yeah.
And I don't even know if he meant to say that, but it rolled off his tongue, and I was like, I have got to write that down. That was good. But I thought, and this is how I counseled him, and I thought about it again when I listened to the message again, is Hebrews 12:3, where it says, "Consider him," speaking of Jesus, "who endured such hostility from sinners against himself." And the words that I had for this younger man that I was discipling was, hey, Jesus is the ultimate victim who was killed, literally separated from God because of my sin, because of your sin, because of the sin of your coaches. And I think sometimes I love this Hebrews passage, there can be power in releasing that trial, especially if it's a sin of another, especially if it could be maybe a family member. I don't know if you guys know what I mean by that. Sometimes the family member wounds can hurt deeper than others. Yeah. But releasing that and saying, even that was put on Christ. Even Jesus at the cross felt the weight of all of that. Anyway, I wanted to wrap up this entire suffering discussion by recommending a book to all of y'all, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering by Pastor Tim Keller. By far the best book on suffering there is probably out there. Not that I've read them all, but such a good book. Yeah. Jake, I know you love that book.
I do too. I have given that one to several people for Christmas gifts. It looks used on my bookshelf just from going through it for myself.
Going through it,
yeah.
No, that's awesome.
I would love to get into, kind of moving along into David's story as well, because there's some real big highlights that I think are worth looking at, where David is running from Saul and David is angry. The whole Shimei story, if you remember this part of the message.
Great story.
Big highlight here. So David is angry. I'm sorry. Not Shimei. I'm jumping the gun. Nabal.
We're not there yet.
Nabal.
Was it Nabal that he ended up getting mad at, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Nabal and Abigail.
So, yep.
That's right. Thank you. Yes. So David gets angry, becomes irrational, and Nabal's wife, I think it was, talks him off the ledge essentially, and talks about how if there's blood on his hands, it's going to threaten his reputation as a king, his role to be the thing that he's already anointed for. It's going to affect his future. And the simple instruction that I love the way Pastor Jared boiled this down is that David listened and he changed. So what is being exposed in you? How can you listen to, whether it's the Lord speaking to you in your circumstances or those around you? How can you listen and change? And I even just wanted to throw this out to you, Tyler. I feel like you would have something for this, but can you tell me about, or Chris too, can you tell me about maybe who or about the kind of person that you have heard from that you really listen to?
Yeah, well, first, when I thought about listen, I almost hesitate to say this, but because it's a little too close to home. But listening is one of those things my wife and I are constantly talking about, maybe fighting about is probably closer to the truth. Where she'll say, "You're not listening to me," and I'll say, "Yes, I am. Like, I'm here. The sound waves that are coming out of your mouth are hitting my ears and being processed in, the back of my brain." And to her, of course, she's like, "I know you're not really listening." And I was thinking about that when Pastor Jared talked about listen and change, and the difference between listening and hearing, which I think as a man, well, I won't throw all men under the bus, but for me, definitely is a huge difference in how I think about things. Like, I think, hey, I heard it, therefore I listened. But that's really not what listening is. Listening is not just hearing it, but also considering the truth of the words, engaging with it, interacting with it, thinking about it. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting about the story is the person that David listens to is this guy's like random wife that he doesn't even know. And I actually wondered, like, sometimes maybe that's who it takes, is somebody just like way outside of our normal circles, because sometimes maybe you're too close to the person, right? And you don't want to hear it from that person. But it takes somebody sort of outside the circles to finally get us to listen. Like, because maybe other people have been saying it and we were hearing it, but we weren't listening. But then finally that last person is the one that says it, and then we finally listen, So I definitely thought about that. But I wondered, Chris, I was going to ask you this, and it kind of it goes along with what Jake was just saying. But, I definitely feel, I'm sure you guys would probably relate to this as well, that as a guy, as a man, it's harder for me to find people that I truly listen to. It's harder for me to find people that maybe it's a respect thing. Maybe it's just like, men have fewer friends, which statistically we know is also true. And even those friends that we have tend to be, like a football friend. You just watch football. You don't really talk. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like my wife and my brother and I talk a lot, but my wife and my sister-in-law are constantly like, "What are you guys talking about?" Because we'll have like hour-long conversations, and then later on we find out that we never talked about that there's a new baby on the way, or that they're moving, or you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
100%, 100%.
Yeah. So I wondered, Chris, like, I don't know if you have any thoughts maybe or insights on, as men, how can we get better at listening and maybe bring other men around us that we would actually listen to, or maybe it's we need different kind of men in our life. I wondered if you had thoughts around those things. Yeah.
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say, especially out of this Nabal and Abigail story, thank God for wives.
Yeah.
Because,
amen.
Dude, because sometimes husbands, we can be, what's the word? Dumb. And our wife will kind of help us out in things. But yeah, so how can we as men find somebody who can talk to and develop a close circle of those kind of people?
Yeah.
One, you have to accept vulnerability. You have to find someone.
Getting real.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where I have a friend who, most of my friends have never seen me cry, right? Like, cause I'm not that dude. Or I have one friend who's seen me cry, and he's seen me ugly cry. You know what I mean? Like that snot and everything just everywhere. So I don't know.
And this is a guy, right?
This is another dude. Yeah. And
when you were just saying that, I was cringing. Like, that's how. And there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely not. But it just shows you even revealing my own thoughts to myself, where I was like, I wouldn't want another guy to see me ugly cry.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't think you need everyone to see you cry.
Definitely.
I mean, let's not weep everywhere we go and type thing. But having at least one of those close friends you can do that with helps. And that person has to be someone that's like a childhood friend almost. Someone who's like walk through stuff with you before, type thing. So yeah, so you have to be vulnerable, and two, you have to accept that you can be wrong. Like if you really want advice, if you really want to hear good counsel, you're gonna have to be willing to be wrong about your things, right? Like, and accept that. Like, hey guys, I did this. This happened because of it. This person's a moron, right? And then if you can have some friends be like, actually, no, you're the moron.
Yeah.
Like, and actually, I don't have any shortage of friends who can tell me that, but I
tell you that all the time.
Oh, constantly, every day of my life.
Well, I guess, Chris, I'm wondering, what would you say to someone, and this has been me many times in my life, where I, have thought, man, I don't have anybody. I had friends like that, maybe in college, let's say. And then, you move away, those people drift away as naturally happens, especially high school, like, and now you're at a new church, maybe a new job, whatever it may be. How do you start over then? Because that's the hard part, right? Like, it's easy if it's a childhood friend who you've had forever. I mean, how do you start over then?
Yeah, well, so I think Jared said this before, that when men do stuff with each other, like serving shoulder to shoulder, like we get that sense of we build that relationship, right? Like, and I'm not saying all women when I say this, but women like to like face-to-face talk. Yeah. Guys, we like to like do things together. So, I don't know. Obviously, with COVID, this kind of changes things, but even just going to a hockey game can be spiritual. Yeah. Even playing video games online with Corey, believe it or not, that can be spiritual. There's something about the Bible calls this koinonia, this fellowship, right? And really, when you have that fellowship, when you serve with other men, you kind of develop that relationship, and then that kind of grows. I mean, you can't go on Match.com and be like, hey, I need a friend. It doesn't really work like that. But volunteer, get out. Yeah. Volunteer at Grace. Volunteer Soup Kitchen.
It's being on everything you're saying here. I feel like it's revolving around this idea of being on mission together. Exactly. Something about writing, so to speak, metaphorically, writing this narrative together is like a glue that keeps relationships strong. I would say that's for absolutely everybody. You brought up a good point about men and women, and I guess I hadn't thought about it that way, about like face-to-face versus side-to-side. That's a really strong thought. Yeah. That's something maybe worth.
This is completely random, but when you were just saying Match.com, I was like, man, if they had a man friend app, I probably would sign up for that.
Man friend,
man, dude, we can do that. Bam, we will do that. We will copyright that. Man friend,
let's do it.
Man friend. Okay,
Mark Zuckerberg, if you're listening to this, can you make that app for us?
I'm down.
All right.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I was going to
get us back on track, Jake.
Yes, I'm going to try. So, for me, one of the things, the kind of person that I go to, especially when it comes to guys, is I feel I know it in my guts when it's somebody I respect. It doesn't even have to be somebody I necessarily want to be like vocationally, or I hope that I'm a husband like them, or I hope I'm as good as a friend of them, or as they are someday, or as athletic. It doesn't even have to be like that. Respect is kind of scalable. Like it goes across tax brackets and pay scales. Okay. Like it's something else. So for me, when I meet that guy, I feel it in my guts. I get a gravel in my guts. And that's kind of for me, it's a cue in my spirit telling me to listen up when this man talks. And I hear or imagine them saying something course corrective to me, and I just know to listen in. And kind of on a different thought, just to bring it back around to this, I cannot remember where I heard this, but to bring it back to the thought of hearing from your wife, hearing from your spouse. The longer I'm married, the more I develop trust between Michelle and I, the more that her voice and the voice of the Holy Spirit are sounding more and more in tune. More and more in the same. So the longer that we're doing that and developing trust, I really feel like I get to hear from the Spirit through her a lot of the time.
Yeah, the ongoing joke in our household is that like God listens to my wife, like hardcore type thing. Like when we were dating, there was we were dating since high school, by the way. I asked her out to 9th grade homecoming, if you can believe that.
Whoa.
I know, throwback. So before we were married, there was this other chick that I in no way was interested in, but she was kind of like flirtatious and stuff with me, right? My wife prayed that she would leave the country. And sure enough,
that's a prayer from God right there.
3 months later, yes, the girl goes to Australia. So like the polar opposite.
That's awesome.
Just complete. Yeah. So yeah, but no, I feel that, you know, your wife always needs to be a calming voice in your life, especially if you're married. Now, where I draw the line though is, I believe that's a role for a wife, not a shorty or boo or
do they still call?
Yeah, I was about to say, is that what the kids call these days?
That's like that's like 50 Cent days, bro. I don't know if that's what it's still called nowadays.
I think it's
no, 100% not. But the kids.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, don't. Okay. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like there's wise counsel in a wife, but not necessarily in a girl you just met like a week ago. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
No, I'm with you.
I was thinking, you know, it's the people that see the real us, I think, that have the best perspective, whoever that might be. It could be even a brother or sister or, you know, a mother or father or a best friend or whoever it might be. The people that we are real enough around that get the real us. Those are the people I think that tend to have God to speak God's voice into our life because we can't see ourselves clearly, you know. Speaking of speaking clearly, it's like the last point I think that Pastor Jared brought up in his message is when people criticize us, but they don't have all the facts. Oh man, this is good. This is probably one of the really hard points for me. Even just 3 years ago, this whole story brought out a story. You know, I had a couple of employees who I found out later were really talking behind my back to my boss and ended up costing me a promotion, actually.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I would say probably 3/4, probably 75% of what they said was very untrue. But my boss wanted to believe it and decided to believe it for whatever reason. You know, I guess because he heard it from two different people, and so I really thought about that, but I loved what Pastor Jared said in his point, because he was saying, you know, David did not, he could have said, well, I'm going to go kill this guy. I'm going to take this fool out. And in fact, one of his mighty men was like, hey, I'll do it, you know, and David kind of had to hold him back, which I loved. But I think when coming out of that whole situation, I think what God ultimately was trying to teach me, and this is where Pastor Jared went with his message as well, is that even when people are criticizing us and they don't have all the facts and they're completely wrong about it, because that's what was happening to David, there's still a point of maybe God appointed that criticism for you.
Yeah.
Which is so hard to hear. I am definitely one of those people who is like, it's not fair. Like, I didn't even do that. Like, I was doing my best. Like, you don't know how many times I could have said this, but I didn't say it. Or I could have like blasted this guy. You know, thinking about one of the employees, like, you know, he was not a good employee, and I could have really brought up a lot of things to our boss and probably got him fired even. But I covered for him sometimes and did my best to work with him, and then, you know, to find out later on he was, you know, essentially stabbing me in the back. But after saying all that, the good that came out of that was God helping me see that criticism through their lens, if you know what I mean by that. And helping me see, even though I would say the majority of it wasn't true, there was some truth in there. Or the criticism couldn't have existed at all. And really, it forced me to take a really, really hard look at myself, which was not a fun process.
Oh, no. But yeah, like you have to do that. Like you Like, okay, these people are saying this for some reason. So,
yeah.
And it's almost like, you see, I'm such a good person and they're so terrible. And, you kind of go with that. But I loved, Jared mentioned this quote by Gene Edwards. God maybe used Saul to kill the Saul in David.
Yes,
dude, that stuck out to me like hardcore.
That's
and it was
right.
like,
yeah,
okay, God, maybe this is happening to me, so I cannot be this way to somebody else.
Yes,
absolutely.
No, that's so right.
Yeah. Well, this has been really, really awesome, Chris. We want to give you a ton of thanks for, number one, your leadership for the students at Grace and all that you're doing there, and the vision that you have for them and your passion. That's one thing. If you ever talk to Chris, you will catch his passion for youth and for students. It's kind of infectious. I love that about you. So thank you so much for being on the show, for sticking with us. This has been kind of a longer episode, but I think it's been all really, really great stuff. So we want to let you guys know about Church Online. It happens every single week. Here at Grace, you can go over to live.graceoc.com to experience Church Online, and we hope that that you've been sticking with us, digging into this series, answering as we've been answering some of these questions, digging into it, and we hope that something we've discussed today in some way could encourage you or move you closer to Jesus.
So what's even better is you can be a part of a special Facebook group where you can find community, encouragement, and connect with the Grace family online. Now, anyone can just go to graceoc.com/FB to join. Next week, we'll be covering the third message in the Man on Fire series, Ring of Fire. So thanks so much for joining us this week. Thanks for listening to Binge Mode.